Owen who? Even at Westminster, few people know who he is. But tonight, Labour rebels have swung behind Owen Smith as the man to bring down Jeremy Corbyn.
I fear that with Jeremy in charge of this party will split and be destroyed. And that is why I felt I had no choice but to put my name forward.
Tonight, we'll try and tell you who Owen Smith is. Also on News at 10. Finally, a clue as to what Brexit will mean for one group of people. The Home Secretary tells foreign nationals she doesn't believe they will ever have to leave the UK. Meanwhile, as the US Secretary of State flies in, Boris's big mouth finally catches up with him.
You've described Hillary Clinton as someone with, quote, dyed blonde hair and pouty lips.
You have an unusually long history of wild exaggerations and, frankly, outright lies.
And just when you thought you'd heard everything this summer, Donald Trump's wife gives a big speech, and it sounds a lot like one we've heard before.
You work hard for what you want in life.
You work hard for what you want in life.
That your word is your bond.
That your word is your bond.
And you do what you say and keep your promise.
And that you do what you say you're going to do.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Every political career has to start somewhere, it's true. But with the greatest of respect to Owen Smith, he's not exactly a household name, even in the rarefied atmosphere of Westminster. Indeed, who is Owen Smith, you may ask? Well, rather suddenly, he is the agreed champion of the many rebel Labour MPs who are trying to bring down Jeremy Corbyn. Mr Smith's only real rival, Angela Eagle, bowed out this afternoon, meaning that the next Labour leader, like every other one, is guaranteed to be a man, a fact that the party's political opponents have been quick to highlight tonight.
Owen Smith. Who? Some of you may be saying, well, today the 46-year-old from South Wales, just 2 days after this campaign launch, became the sole challenger to Jeremy Corbyn for leadership of the Labour Party and of Her Majesty's opposition.
Jeremy Corbyn does have passionate support from many Labour members. Do you really think you can beat him?
Yes, I do, because I'm going to be just as radical as Jeremy Corbyn, but I think a bit more competent and able to take that message to the country with a bit more energy and purpose.
Would you work for Jeremy Corbyn if he wins?
No, if Jeremy wins, I have lost trust in Jeremy as a leader of our party. That is why I'm standing against him. And I fear that with Jeremy in charge of this party will split and be destroyed. And that is why I felt I had no choice but to put my name forward.
But it was his colleague Angela Eagle who just over a week ago initially took the plunge and challenged Corbyn. Today Labour MPs were deciding whether to nominate her or him, but before the polls closed, she said,
Owen Smith has a lead, and I think that it's in the best interest of the Labour Party that we now come together so that we can have one candidate. So I'm announcing tonight that I'm withdrawing from this race and supporting Owen.
How disappointing is it that the Tories are on their second female Prime Minister and Labour's never had even a female permanent leader?
It's exceptionally disappointing. There's no two ways about it. Every Tory has every right to crow at me in the corridors, which many of them have. It's a hurdle we don't seem to ever be able to get over, and it is massively disappointing.
So who is the latest man in a suit to elbow out a woman candidate? Well, he's a former television and radio producer who once dialed 999 for a police response to a story, and the next lobbyist for a US drugs company. Not a working class hero, but someone who's tribal in his passion for the party. Now, these Labour supporters have the chance to pick between just two candidates, Corbyn and Smith. United, they're not.
I would have liked today not to have happened. I think Corbyn's got a really big mandate to lead the party, as polls that have come out today have shown.
Owen Smith has a big appeal. He is the unity candidate. He does appeal to both the left and right of the party.
I would have preferred that Jeremy had accepted that he didn't have the confidence of the PLP and had stood down with a bit of dignity, and then the party could have had a real choice of multiple candidates.
Do you have anything to say to Angela Eagle?
The current leader smiling because although Labour MPs who detest him are at last rallying behind a single challenger, he remains the favourite to win the contest, though the price of victory may be destruction of the party that has been his family for 40 years.
And Robert joins me from Westminster. Good evening, Robert. I guess the only question is he actually going to win?
Well, for somebody who's not a household name, probably not even in his own household, he does have absolutely extraordinary self-belief. Actually, like no young politician I've met since David Cameron about a decade ago. He does seem to believe that leading the Labour Party is his destiny. And I have to say, in this very short leadership campaign, so far he's shown, well, extraordinarily good tactical grasp. Yesterday, he said to the Parliamentary Labour Party he would withdraw if Angela Eagle got more votes. She refused to make that commitment. They then decided he was putting party before self. So he's won. He's got the opportunity to wrest the leadership from Jeremy Corbyn, but it won't be easy. He remains extraordinarily popular with many Labour members, and they seem immune to the extreme criticism that many of Corbyn's colleagues are making of Corbyn's leadership. And we should be under no illusion about how high the stakes are. I spend hour after hour talking to disgruntled Labour MPs, and they are all absolutely convinced that if Smith doesn't do it, it is the end of the Labour Party as we know it. That party will break up.
Robert, extraordinarily dramatic, really, but thank you very much indeed for now. Now, almost a month on from the big vote, we still know the square root of precisely nothing about how our future outside the European Union is going to be shaped. We don't know when we will trigger Article 50 or what the terms of our exit will be, and anyway, you know all this. But we did get some guidance tonight on the thorny issue of immigration. There were signals from Boris Johnson that the specific manifesto targets for immigration might be quietly dropped. And as for the status of EU nationals living and working here, the new Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, told News at 10 she didn't believe they would ever have to leave.
Farms and fields across the country, cafes and coffee machines, powered partly by migrant workers. The last government pledged to get net migration down to tens of thousands. Today, the new Home Secretary wouldn't commit to that target. Hours later, the Foreign Secretary appeared to support her.
I think the Home Secretary is entirely right to be careful about committing to numbers because one doesn't want to be in a position where you're disappointing people.
When Amber Rudd took up her post last week, this was the one issue everybody wanted answers to.
Were you going to be able to get immigration down to the tens of thousands quickly?
Just going to get started.
Today, she would only pledge to get it to sustainable levels. The other issue in her intro was whether to continue suggesting EU migrants be sent home if Brits aren't allowed to stay abroad, something I asked her about today.
I think that everybody's aware now of the status that we've got. We are leaving the EU. We need to make a success of it. And as part of that, we will need to have a negotiation about what's going on with the UK nationals abroad and the Europeans here.
If the government had to make good its threat, the NHS would be particularly hard hit. EU doctors and nurses are everywhere in the health service. Today, the NHS chief spoke out.
It will be very important that those staff continue to understand that they are both an intrinsic and important part of the teams of carers across the National Health Service and that they will continue to have a big welcome in this country.
I put his comments to the Home Secretary.
Can we cope without their 10% of the NHS?
But you see, I don't believe they will ever have to leave. What we have to make sure is that there is an arrangement down whereby our UK nationals are also secure abroad.
In a hospital trust like this, some 15% of workers are from the EU. The Home Secretary's comments to us today may reassure some, but most of the people inside this building would prefer her to kill the issue completely.
So 15% of our workforce here across our 5 hospitals comes from mainland Europe. That's about 1,300 members of staff. If they all had to go, and we obviously hope they never need to, we'd need to close wards and services, as would most trusts in England.
But back to the big picture, overall migration levels. Tonight, Downing Street insisted the Prime Minister and Amber Rudd were on the same page, reducing net migration to sustainable levels, which are tens of thousands. But many in the new government think the target is impossible, and if it isn't dead yet, many are trying to kill it. Allegra Stratton, News at 10.
Now, it is fair to say that many people who decided to vote to leave the EU weren't too impressed by the experts, but there was a definite sense today that we were all being ticked off by the International Monetary Fund. It didn't quite frankly mince its words, blaming a cut in its global growth forecast on Britain's decision to leave the EU. We had, it said, thrown a spanner in the works. Our economics editor, Norina Hertz, joins me. Norina, I mean, reading it in detail, didn't sound like the end of the worth's the wrong words. Let me start again. It didn't sound like the end of the world, certainly in terms of its global growth projections.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When it comes to the global economy, what it's saying is that growth is going to slow down, but really not significantly. When it comes to the UK, however, it's a really different story. There, they're using very strong language, talking about negative short-term consequences. But to be clear, what they're not saying is that we're facing a looming recession. I'm sure you remember back in May, the Treasury was warning that if we were to vote leave...
Total disaster, I seem to remember.
Total disaster. The economy was going to shrink within a year. That isn't what the IMF's saying. But what they are saying is that we're going to grow at a slower rate. We're going to grow at about half the rate that they predicted back in April, and they're all, which is about the rate that France and Germany grow. So not so terrible. But... as you know all too well,
depends on assumptions,
any forecast depends on the assumptions.
Yeah.
And this is where this story gets really interesting, because the assumptions upon which it's based is that the key assumption is that the UK and the EU are going to forge a new trading relationship, which is basically going to look like the arrangement they currently have. If that doesn't prove to be the case, well, then the situation will look very gloomy.
OK. We'll be discussing this many times, I suspect, but thank you very much indeed. Now, Theresa May repeated her mantra of Brexit means Brexit at her first cabinet today, even though it remains, as we've said, unclear what that actually means. Every department, she insisted, must be Brexit, whatever that may mean. But with this no doubt ringing in his ears, Boris Johnson walked into his first meeting with the US Secretary of State, bearing the message that Brexit Britain will still be a major global player. What Boris Johnson wasn't expecting, perhaps, was an embarrassingly public, full-on attack from the American press about his previous foreign policy gaffes.
The new Prime Minister had her new cabinet assembled in front of her in full for the very first time this morning, and Theresa May told her team the new approach she expects is nothing less than a very serious one.
When I launched my leadership campaign, I said that politics is not a game. The decisions that we take around this table affect people's day-to-day lives.
The Foreign Secretary allowed a wry smile to creep across his face. Surely she didn't mean him when she said politics is not a game. The latest test, though, for Boris Johnson's new serious approach came this afternoon at a press conference with his American counterpart John Kerry. If only the doorman had understood. This wasn't meant to be a day for games. Inside, time to address the elephant in the room. Boris Johnson campaigns to leave the EU. John Kerry and his boss, President Obama, desperately wanted Britain to stay.
But that's not the way the people of this country voted. And we respect democracy, all of us.
So far, so good.
That this man is a very smart and capable man. That's the Boris Johnson that I have met together.
Stop that. That's fine. That's great. Thank you.
It's called diplomacy.
That's fantastic. It's going well. It's going well, John.
But it went less well when the American media started asking questions about all those times Boris Johnson had been rude about their leaders.
You've described Hillary Clinton as someone with, quote, dyed blonde hair and pouty lips and a steely blue stare, like a sadistic nurse in a mental hospital, unquote.
You will note Boris hung his head. But during the next question, keep your eyes on John Kerry's face.
You have an unusually long history of wild exaggerations and, frankly, outright lies that I think few foreign secretaries have prior to this job.
I'm afraid that there is such a rich thesaurus now of things that I've said that it would really take me too long to engage in a full global itinerary of apology to all concerned.
So the man in charge of the Foreign Office here won't be embarking on a global itinerary of apology, but his boss, Theresa May, will tomorrow embark on a European itinerary of diplomacy. In Berlin, she will meet Germany's Angela Merkel, Europe's most powerful politician.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. America accepts Britain is leaving the EU. It's now focused on how we do it. Chris Ship, News at 10 at the Foreign Office.
The International Olympic Committee has delayed its decision over whether to ban all of Russia's athletes from competing at the forthcoming Rio Games. It follows a report which found evidence of a 4-year state-sponsored doping programme. The organisation's taking the time to explore its legal options before reaching a conclusion, but it has decided to retest all Russian competitors from the 2014 Sochi Winter Games. The aftermath of the axe attack by a young Afghan migrant on passengers on a suburban German train took a new and rather sinister, it must be said, twist today. The so-called Islamic State released a video purporting to show the attacker calling himself a soldier of the caliphate and vowing to carry out a suicide mission in Germany. 4 people were injured, one critically, in his rampage with an axe and a knife on a train near the Bavarian city of Würzburg yesterday evening. He was shot dead by police.
He calls himself a soldier of the caliphate and promises attacks in every village and city. And with a knife in his hand, he says he's preparing for a suicide mission. It was a knife and an axe that he used to slash passengers on an intercity train last night, shouting, "God is great."
We have some very badly injured people, 5 in total.
And yet intelligence services had concluded there was no evidence of direct contact between him and IS. The Interior Minister said a text in Pashto was found that was partly written in Arabic characters, partly in Latin characters, which indicates that this could be someone who was self-radicalized recently. A jihadist made in his bedroom, home alone, they thought. He travelled to Germany on his own. This morning an IS flag was found in his room. This was his home until a fortnight ago, an accommodation centre where he lived alongside dozens of other refugees. What counter-terrorism officers are here trying to understand is what happened inside this place and what happened afterwards. The attack has reignited old debates here about terrorism, about migration. Hundreds of thousands of people have made a similar journey to the attacker, but only one has chosen this same path. Rohit Katru, News at 10, Würzburg, Germany.
Now, Donald Trump hailed his wife Melania at the Republican convention as America's next First Lady. But the fact is, his acclamation as the Republican presidential candidate isn't exactly going smoothly. It was bad enough when party opponents made a noisy last stand from the convention floor. But then his wife, Melania, became embroiled in a very public, very embarrassing scandal over accusations that large chunks of her convention speech were borrowed from none other than Michelle Obama. No. Really? Well, tonight Mr. Trump will be supported by his children, his daughter Tiffany, a fashion model and singer, and afterwards on the convention stage by his son, Donald Trump Jr. But under the permatan surface tonight, Donald Trump himself is said to be seething.
It was a showman's entrance by Donald Trump. His mission appeared to be a simple one: to introduce his wife, a former fashion model from Slovenia, to the American people.
The next First Lady of the United States.
It started well. For those of us on the floor, Melania was winning over the delegates.
He's ready to fight every day to give our children the better future they deserve.
But later came the realization that key sections of the speech were clearly plagiarized. An aspiring First Lady borrowing words from, of all people, the current First Lady.
You work hard for what you want in life.
You work hard for what you want in life.
That your word is your bond.
That your word is your bond.
And you do what you say and keep your promise.
And that you do what you say you're going to do.
that you treat people with respect,
that you treat people with dignity and respect.
Once the two speeches were compared like that, Trump's top advisors immediately circled the wagons, defiant and in denial.
It's fragments of words. She spoke in front of 35 million people yesterday. She knew what she was doing, and she never cribbed from another speech.
From the Trump plane on her way to give the primetime speech, Melania had claimed it was largely her own work.
Because I wrote it and with a little help as possible.
What happened at this podium last night was a fiasco. Few people blaming Melania, but rather her speechwriting team. And remember, this convention was intended to be a triumph of both party unity and political messaging. Instead, it's flirting with disaster. Anti-Trump voices making a last stand. A divisive candidate in danger of ripping Republicans apart.
You are ignoring delegates who have been elected to this convention.
Opponents of Trump are stunned by the ferocity of attacks against them.
We've been subjected to incredible threats when we came out against Trump. I've had over 1,000 death threats.
1,000 death threats.
And this is why a lot of the delegates would not come out publicly.
There is a candidate who bridges the factional and policy divides. Not a Republican, but their opponent, Hillary Clinton. In the words of many here, she should be in the jailhouse, not the White House.
That's right, Hillary for prison. She deserves to be in stripes.
Republicans portray Mrs. Clinton in apocalyptic terms. That seems to be the kind of theme that does unite everybody here, is a visceral dislike of Hillary Clinton.
Well, Hillary Clinton's record has been nothing short of a weapon of mass destruction. I mean, everything she touches is a disaster.
But none of that angry rhetoric disguises the own goal scored here with Melania's speech. An act of plagiarism that has Team Trump on the defensive and humiliated.
Robert, I'm tempted to say that both British and American politicians seem determined to put all Hollywood scriptwriters out of business. It's a barely believable fiasco, as you said this, but in the end, do you think it matters politically?
Well, Tom, look, it's inept, it's clumsy, it's a sign of an election campaign that is organisationally dysfunctional. This is, prime-time presidential politics. There is every expectation that speechwriting teams should be at the top of their game, absolutely vetting this sort of stuff. But look, it's unlikely to impact November. As you saw in my report, this party has got significantly bigger problems than what we saw last night. Down there on the floor, when you talk to the delegates, there is anger, there is insecurity, there are economic grievances. But what you don't detect is a sort of positive, optimistic message that is so often in American politics the absolute key to winning the White House. And very strikingly here, there's no, at least not yet, any attempt to reach out to minority communities, to Hispanics or to African Americans. So all of those issues, this key of broadening their appeal, that ultimately is going to be so much more significant than what Melania said last night.
OK, Robert, for now, thank you very much indeed. Now, Donald Trump has built, of course, his presidential bid on the ability to stir up populist feelings. And no single speech grabbed more headlines than his vow to build a wall along the Mexican border to keep out what he called rapists and drug dealers. It certainly got him noticed, but it's also possible it may have backfired. The fear of deportation among the 5.5 million undocumented Mexicans is causing a push for naturalisation. Citizenship applications are up 14% since the Trump candidacy, and citizenship, of course, means a vote. Tonight, for the second of our series, exploring the divided states of America, we've travelled to a city close to the Mexican border, Phoenix, capital of the state of Arizona. 3 people living in the city's Latino and Hispanic communities told us, in their own words, how Donald Trump's rhetoric plays into their fears.
What we're seeing here in the United States is nothing new to the world. The fear
of the other, of immigrants, of people taking our jobs, of bringing illness and crime. We've heard this over and over again in our country.
Our country! Proud made in USA, bitch! Made in USA!
My name is Emmanuel Gallardo Sanidad. I'm the Immigration and Worker Center Coordinator. It's really hard. It's sad because under this current administration, there's been more deportations, right? More than 2 million than ever, right? I mean, it's just record numbers of deportations, and it's a scary reality that people have to live in fear constantly that they may lose their parents or their children. You know, it's tough.
As an undocumented individual and as with an undocumented family, Donald Trump is a direct threat to my family. If he wins, that might be the separation of my family. My name is Abril Gallardo. I'm 25 years old, and I'm an advocate for immigrant families. I feel Arizona is a battleground. The border, it's literally 3 hours away from here, from Phoenix. When you're driving, you can see the fence. Just imagining that if he wins, there will be like an actual border there. It just breaks my heart to think about that his solution is building a wall.
I haven't seen my mom in 10 years because of her legal status. She had to leave because she couldn't find a job here. My dad got deported in 2000. My name is Felix Trejo. I'm 20, Mexican American, and I'm a U.S. citizen, but my family is undocumented. We need to make sure that our voices are heard, which is why we're out here, which is why we tell people why they should turn out to vote. The reasons why a lot of young people are getting involved is because it's all that anger, all that frustration that they have inside of them, and they get very passionate about it and very emotional.
So they're in the middle of their interview as we speak to become naturalized U.S. citizens. So once they pass this, then their next step is the oath ceremony. So this is the big moment for them.
La verdad, nosotros escogimos ser ciudadanos porque
we wanted to become citizens because we see things here in the United States, in our state, getting very difficult, and we think it's important to have the right to vote.
Yo creo que
Mr. Trump has pushed us to become citizens, and we hope that other people, right, will take this step.
Donald Trump is an evil, nasty person and doesn't realize that the people like myself and other immigrant groups are the people that make this country run. My name is Elizabeth Gonzalez. I'm applying to become an American citizen. I feel like if Donald Trump were to become president, he'd be like a terrorist because he doesn't see the love that people like me have for this country. I feel like we're ready. I feel like the Latino community is ready to go out and vote. We do not want this guy to be president, and we're going to show that come the November election. We're ready.
Well, tomorrow we take the final part of our series on the divided states of America into the industrial heartlands of Donald Trump's voter appeal in Youngstown, Ohio. In its heyday, this steel city in the American Rust Belt, as it was called, was a Democrat stronghold. Now, with its prosperity long eaten away by economic gloom, its people feel ignored and dispossessed and are reaching out to Mr. Trump. And finally, before we go and before the expected thunderstorms arrive, let's enjoy some of the best aspects of a blazing summer's day. Yes, it was hot. It was summer. On one of the hottest July days ever, in fact, topping the mercury at 33.5 at Briars Norton. These gorillas at London Zoo cooled off with huge chunks of ice lollies. It was a day, of course, to ignore a lot of the rules and norms, such as 3 near Winchester. But this was the solution to the heat in Blackpool, a flat cap and a doze, and you're sorted. That's it. That's summer. Blink and you miss it. I'll be back tomorrow. But for now, that's it. Good night, and thank you very much indeed for watching.